seemed absent, distracted. I'll blame it on that these times. One of the things I'd like to invite you to do is come up a little bit closer. Maybe this table, this table, and just to make it a little bit more intimate. We're going to start here, and maybe Stuart will come around and try to follow you if you guys feel warm and welcome. I had said there was a fire in this room, so we have to sort of imagine that setting here where we can kind of put up our feet, have a cup of chocolate. So thanks for coming again. Welcome to our residency speaker series. This is our second speaker in this residency.
Yes, please.
Stuart Clarke is the executive director of the Concrete Foundation, who joins us tonight from Eastern Maryland. Brave some of the weather and the road conditions coming across to get here. The foundation works towards important research and stakeholder engagement processes to develop strategies for confronting Maryland's most important environmental challenges. So in his role as ED, Stuart has been an advocate for many of Maryland's pressing and persistent environmental issues as a kind of venture philanthropist. He's someone who's engaged in the issues the foundation supports, and he's able to offer intellectual vision and hands-on assistance, periodically writing about environmental issues on the foundation website, offering to take some part of the work of the project, connecting people to those they should know and need to know, and attending meetings and making site visits to the project the foundation funds and supports. I actually attended one such meeting of a land trust, the Land Conservation Trust on the Eastern Shore. It was about a year ago, and we were gathered to talk about genuine progress indicators that are kind of nearly unique to Maryland. I had mentioned the other night the gross happiness index in Bhutan. And I don't know if Maryland is quite like that or not, but I like to think of it that way. So the question was, in that setting, how to apply essentially a kind of alternative to the gross domestic product measure that we have here at the local and regional level. And it was a spirited discussion, really interesting discussion. These are stakeholders that I think got really excited about it. And the next day, we all had an 80-page PDF in our inboxes from Stuart, a study from a German think tank about how initiatives measuring social progress yield benefits beyond metrics. So I thought, oh, that's great. Stuart really understands the sort of social dimensions of all this, which is, I think, what we're about. So if I could just use three terms to characterize his work there, it's, as I understand it, it's research, encouragement, and guidance. Previous to his work at Town Creek, Stuart served as a program officer with the Turner Foundation and as development director of the Southern Partners Fund, both in Atlanta, Georgia. He's also served on the faculty at Williams College as director of the Atlanta Outers Bound Center and as the COO of Hands-On Network, a national network of community-based centers for volunteerism and civic action. Stuart has also served on the boards of the Center for a New American Dream, which, if you haven't seen, has some cool graphics and animations that are worth taking a look at. Also, the Environmental Grant Makers Association and Outward Bound, and is currently a trustee of the Chesapeake Bay Trust. So when we started to map out the new environmental studies program here at Goucher, Stuart was one of the initial advisors convened to help us create a vision and to begin building this program. And I'm happy to have him here with us today to see the beginnings of our program. So please welcome Stuart Clarke.
I hope that you will indulge me and allow us to take a few minutes and let me learn a little bit about who's in the room. I'm really interested in who you are and where you come from, partly just because it seems to make sense to know who I'm talking to, but also because of the fact that of the conversations that I participated in when Tom was putting the program together, sort of who is it that is going to actually come and do this degree. So would anybody be willing to kind of break the ice and give me a minute and a half on who you are, what you do when you're not doing this, and why you decided to enter this course of study? I do have experience behind the podium in front of students, so I do know how to call on people.
I'm Andrew Slater. I'm cultural sustainability and digital arts media. My particular interest is on iconography and helping to help people evaluate their systems of value and reclaiming narratives for indigenous or disenfranchised people. I'm a martial arts teacher. I'm a director for a Native American civil rights community, and yeah, that's me.
And are you from this area?
No, I'm highly known. I'm very nomadic, but I live in Silver Spring.
So by from this area, I meant Silver Spring is close enough.
Yes.
Are most of you Marylanders? No. Yes. Yes. Everybody from Maryland? No. Where are you from?
Colorado.
Colorado. And so what brought you here?
I'm teaching in a couple of the programs, but for residency, I'm teaching in the research methods for environmental sustainability.
So you're just here. You just come in for the residency.
Yep.
Anybody else not from Maryland? Where are you okay? No, I'm sorry. Where are you from?
Also Colorado.
And are you on the faculty as well? Or
No, I'm a student, but I grew up here in Maryland.
And what is it that, are you in the cultural sustainability or the environmental
I am.
studies? Which?
Oh, sorry, cultural sustainability, but I'm doing pretty heavy focus in environmental studies. I'm taking Tom's class right now, and if the stars align, I might do a dual degree.
And what's the focus of your interest?
Science epistemologies, and as they impact upon biomedical workforce, who's involved in that research, who's asking the questions.
I get one more? I get one more, probably two more. Can I get one more? No? Yeah.
Well, I'm in your neighborhood, so I want to introduce myself. My name's Mike Blahovich. I live in St. Michael's, former St. Michael's Town Commissioner and founder of a Maryland nonprofit, Coastal Heritage Alliance. We work all along the eastern shore with the watermen and the watermen.
And so, cultural sustainability or environmental studies?
Cultural sustainability, but I am in Tom's introductory environmental course, this residency.
Well, it's good to see another Eastern Shore person. Can I get one more? Come on. No, you.
Me? I can tell that we're equal. Well, I kind of grew up here too, but I live in Missouri now. I'm in the MAX program, and my interest is ever changing influence. And
What is it today?
today it's community development / place and identity. How we relate to others and the place that we're in, and how we relate to ourselves where we are.
This is the first opportunity that most of you are having to see each other face to face. You got to be a little more responsive. This is the first opportunity that most of you are having to see each other face to face, right?
Well, Well, it's kind of a reunion for those of us that return to residency year after year, or so. Yes and no.
Yes.
Meet new people, you renew former relationships.
Well, thank you for sharing. That does give me a little bit better sense. One thing in particular, I wasn't certain whether everybody was known or not. So Tom asked me to talk a little bit about the GPI, and I did ask him if and how much you knew about the GPI. So if you know anything about the GPI, raise your left hand. Okay. So I'm going to do this in three ways, or there'll be three pieces to it. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Town Creek Foundation, and what we do, and why we do what we do. And that's going to serve as context for then telling you a little bit about what we are doing with the GPI. And telling you what we are doing with the GPI will also include telling you what the GPI is. So you will learn what the GPI is, but you're not going to learn it immediately. So there's a little GPI surprise coming. And then I'm going to share with you some thoughts about some of the questions that those of us that are working with and on the GPI are grappling with. Okay? And I'm going to try to do that in a lively way, and I'm going to try to do it in a brief way, because it would be much more interesting to talk with you than to talk. So the Town Creek Foundation is, we are a privately endowed grant-making foundation. We've been in business since 1981, and we provide funding support for work that strengthens environmental protection and promotes policies and practices that will lead to a more sustainable future. Our grant-making is focused on advocacy work, so that's campaigns, initiatives, that are seeking to achieve changes in policies, regulations, and practices, usually but not exclusively by legislative or judicial means. So the folks that we support are the folks that spend a lot of time in Annapolis trying to persuade legislators to pass new policies. They spend a lot of time in Annapolis with state agencies trying to encourage them to tighten up regulations, and they spend a fair amount of time trying to mobilize public support for those kinds of things. So in last year, 2014, we made about $8 million in grants. And our grant range in size from grants as small as $25,000 to grants $200,000 to $250,000. Most of our grants are in the $75,000 to $100,000 range. Like most private foundations in the United States, we were established to exist in perpetuity. So most private foundations are the way. It's always a surprise to me how many people know about the nonprofit sector in general and foundations in particular. But most foundations are established to exist forever. They have an endowment, or at least the privately endowed foundation. They have an endowment. That endowment is professionally invested. It generates income, and they use some portion of that income to make their grants. But they do that in a way that enables the endowment to continue to grow. And in that manner, they're able to exist in perpetuity. So we were established in 1981 with the intention that we would exist in perpetuity. About 3 years ago, our board decided to sunset the foundation over a 10-year period and exhaust all of our resources and close our doors on or before December 31st. So we are now 3 years into what will be a 10-year spend down of our resources. And we can talk with, most people are interested in why we would do that, and we can talk about that if you want to, but that's not what I'm here. There are several specific consequences that followed from that decision to spend out the foundation's resources. The first and obvious one is we have more resources to work with. Right? So because instead of making grants at a rate that enables us to continue to grow our endowment, our corpus, we're making grants at a rate that's intended to exhaust that corpus. So what that has done at this point in time, our grant making right now, last year, year before last, this year, is about triple what it was prior to the decision to spend out the foundation's resources. So we've got a lot more money to work with. The second important consequence that it really heightened a sense of urgency on our part about making the best use of the time we had left. So we knew we had 10 years. One of the things about functioning one of the things about a foundation that functions in perpetuity is that, we all like to think that we are operating with a sense of urgency that's appropriate to the issues that we're dealing with. But when you know you're going to be around forever, and you know that you're going to continue to pump out grants forever, that does have a tendency, I think, to undercut that. So for us, the notion that we've got a date certain by which time, what I tell people is our plan is to throw a big party on December 31st, 2021, and to bounce the caterer's check. That would be great. But it heightened our sense of urgency about how to make sure that we really we're making the best use of the resources that we had. And in particular, our sense of urgency kind of cohered around three specific questions that we felt we needed to incorporate into our work and encourage the people that we support to incorporate into their work as well. I'm going to read these questions to you. And I think that they are, particularly for those of you that are in the environmental studies program, I think these are the questions. I think these are the questions that really need to be grappled with by anybody who's interested in environmental work in 2015. First, and this is Maryland specific, but it could be asked about any place, is the scale and pace of change that we have seen in Maryland sufficient in view of the political, economic, and ecological headwinds that appear to be on the way. So in the state of Maryland, over the past 8 years, really, we've actually seen a good deal of significant environmental progress. We've seen some dramatic policy initiatives. We've seen some of them have actually had some of them have actually precipitated real change. Others have not yet, but we have been a national leader in environmental policy. At the same time, there are all sorts of economic and political and ecological headwinds that we're confronting. And so there's a real serious question about whether, even given the amount of progress that we've made, is it going to be enough given what we're confronting? And climate change is really an obvious example of that, but it's not the obvious example of the headwind, but it's not the only. Second question, are the strategies that are producing incremental pollution reductions in the state also building sufficient political power to sustain and accelerate those reductions under changed political and economic conditions? So again, made a lot of progress in the state over the past 8 years. A lot of that progress was a function of the fact that we had leadership in the governor's office and leadership in the General Assembly. There's been a change in administration, and the new administration is not likely to see environmental issues as an opportunity for leadership in the way in which the last administration did. And so the question of whether there is enough real popular support to sustain the progress that has been made. So that was a question that we had for ourselves. And then finally, our third question was, can we sustainably address Maryland's major pollution challenges by reforming the practices that generate pollution, but leaving unchanged the purpose, logic, and structural relationships of the systems in which those practices are embedded? And I'm going to repeat that because that's really the question that points you to the GPI. Can we sustainably address Maryland's major pollution challenges by reforming the practices that generate that pollution, but leaving unchanged the purpose, logic, and structural relationships of the systems in which those practices are embedded? So if we've got a system that generates pollution, generates waste, generates toxicity, can we sustainably address those issues just by capping the tailpipe, right? Just by finding ways of making it produce less of that stuff, if it is part of the logic of the system to produce that stuff? that's the question that we felt we needed to begin to ask because we don't have a lot of time left to make whatever sort of impact we're going to be able to make on that issue. And also because as a private foundation that doesn't have to raise money, that doesn't have to really concern itself very much with what anybody says other than our board, or what anybody thinks other than our board, we have the opportunity to say and do things that other organizations don't have the opportunity to say. We can take risks that other organizations can't take because we don't care. That's a little bit of a but only a So we concluded that we had an obligation to really think about these issues and figure out how they ought to be manifested in the world. And that's the context for our interest in the GPI. So what is the GPI? Does anybody know what GPI stands for?
Isn't it genuine progress index? Indicators? You said index, that's, I thought it was indicators, but I think somebody said index.
Somebody, not you, somebody.
It's the Genuine Progress Index.
Indicator. Oh, index.
Well, it's the Genuine Progress Index that includes a bunch of genuine progress indicators.
Okay.
Different people call it different things. I would give you credit for either. So
I was listening, and I mean, that's the point. I was being a good student, I was listening. Just like most students, you all of you were as well.
So the Genuine Progress Index or indicator is a set of 26 indicators that intends to be a way to help us to be able to measure and track an entity, whether it's a society, a state, a nation, a county, a municipality, for that entity to measure and track its progress in achieving and sustaining the kinds of good things that we all want for our communities and ourselves. So it's a set of indicators that intends to allow an entity to measure and track its progress in achieving and sustaining the kinds of good things that we all want for our communities and for ourselves. It does this by identifying things that it thinks of as indicators of societal progress or prosperity, converting them to a common metric, and tracking change in the sum of that metric over time. It was developed in response to what many people felt were the shortcomings and the negative ramifications of reliance on the GDP. You know what the GDP is? It's a GDP.
Gross domestic product.
Excellent. Gross domestic product. So the people who are organized around the idea of the GPI have a number of criticisms of the GDP. The first is that they feel like it doesn't distinguish between economic activity that represents, well, first of all, you know what the GDP, you know what it stands for, you know what it is. What is the GDP?
Money. How much people consume a year?
Not exactly.
How much they produce?
How much we produce?
Not exactly.
The money we make from how much we
Not exactly. You're raising your hand?
I am not.
Oh,
Is it like how productive we are, how much we're producing?
not exactly.
All right. I'm done.
I mean, I think part of the issue that people have with people that have concern about it have with it is that there is sort of a lack of clarity about what it actually is, but it does tend to that lack of clarity does tend to kind of organize itself around the idea that it's a clear measurement of forward movement. Right? So how much we produce, how much we consume. It's kind of something that gives us a sense of how well we're moving forward. It's a measure of the volume of economic activity. The volume of economic activity. So it's not, strictly speaking, how much we produce or how much we consume. It's the volume of economic activity. And it doesn't distinguish, so this is one of the criticisms, it doesn't distinguish between economic activity that represents more goods and an economic activity that may represent more bads. Right? So as an example, I tried to think of two cute examples of that. Oranges and oil spills. Okay? So if you have a bumper crop of oranges and you sell more oranges, there's more economic activity that adds to the GDP. If you have an oil spill and you got to clean it up, there's more economic activity, adds to the GDP. Here's the second one. School construction and serial killers. Okay? School construction, buy a lot of stuff, employ a lot of people, economic activity. Serial killers, overtime for police officers, probably overtime for journalists, economic activity. More commercial, more people watching the news to find out what the serial killer's doing, more ad revenue, more economic activity. So the GDP doesn't distinguish between economic activity that we would think of as the result of good things and economic activity that we would think of as a result of bad things. Second criticism that people make of the GDP is that it doesn't include goods or bads that are not directly and immediately manifest as market transactions. So things that we might think of as good in the society and that we might want more of, but are not things that are bought and sold in the market, don't show up in the GDP. So more free time, more volunteering, these things don't show up in the GDP. So to the extent that the GDP, that people tend to think of it as this measurement of how we're doing, with the idea being that the bigger the number, the better we're doing. The concern is that, well, it doesn't do that really that well because it doesn't tell us, there's a lot of things it doesn't tell us anything at all about. And that in fact is the third criticism, that it has an outsized influence on social decisions and public policy. And it does so in a way that tends to promote an undervaluation of policies and practices that promote goods that are not readily and conventionally represented as economic activity. So these are the things that people who pay attention to this stuff are concerned about, and the reason why they try to think about, well, what could we do to either replace or supplement the GDP? They believe that it's valuable to have ways of measuring our social progress and the state of our societies, but they feel like the GDP isn't the way, the best way. So how could we do it better? What else could we do? And that's sort of the excuse me. That's the space from within which the GPI, as well as other, and these things are called alternate social indicators, as well as other alternate social indicators have developed. Now, environmentalists tend to be heavily represented in the set of folks that think about these issues and that support and promote the GPI, because the GDP's blindnesses to the costs of pollution and to the value of ecosystem services are particularly clear, but the blindness to those things are particularly clear and particularly compelling. So people who are concerned about pollution, who are interested in policies to reduce pollution, are very clear that if as a society we're not in any regular, consistent way tracking the costs of pollution, then the GDP is not necessarily going to be a helpful tool for us as we're trying to promote policies to reduce pollution. Similarly, if we're interested in policies that seek to preserve and promote the value that our ecosystem, the value of the services that our ecosystem provides to us, the GDP, because those services are, again, typically not monetized, they don't show up in the GDP, and the GDP is a less useful tool for promoting and supporting those policies. So that's the space within which the GPI lives. mention two concerns that people have about the GPI. Well, first, before doing that, I think useful in that would be to give you a sense of, so I said it's 26 indicators. And I didn't say anything about what these indicators were, right? It could be like, stupid stuff. So let's see what the stupid stuff. If these 26 indicators are broken up into three categories: economic indicators, environmental indicators, and social indicators. So I'm just going to randomly choose 3 indicators from each category to try to give you some sense of the flavor of this thing. Economic indicators, personal consumption expenditures. And so the GPI tracks, the GPI for the state of Maryland tracks personal consumption expenditures in Maryland. How much money in Maryland is spending on personal consumption. Cost of consumer durables. So what is how much does it cost for Marylanders to purchase things like I don't know, what's a consumer durable?
Refrigerator?
That's what I was thinking. Refrigerator. Cost of underemployment. That's a little different. And we tend to think about unemployment. We don't tend to think about the fact that underemployment may have a social cost that's worth tracking. What do we mean by underemployment? What do you think we mean by that?
Like someone who can't get a job at their skill level, maybe, there's no opportunity, so at the fall of due, and maybe they make less because of that.
So at the micro level, I think it could mean that. I think at the macro level, it could mean the sort of the gap between available jobs and job seekers. So like if there are job seekers and there are available jobs that those job seekers are not filling, that's also an underemployment, and there's a social cost associated with that as well. So those are 3 of the economic indicators, right? Environmental indicators. These should be, for the most part, clear. Cost of water pollution. Currently, we don't, in any clear, consistent, comprehensive way, track the cost of water pollution in the state or in the country. Cost of noise pollution. That's a little different. It might not be something that you would think of as an environment. But their argument is that noise pollution imposes a cost on our society. And if we're interested in the degree to which our society is progressing, then we ought to take account of the way in which that cost is moving. So if we have more noise pollution, there's a higher cost of noise pollution, and we need to subtract that from our sense of how well we're doing. If there's less noise pollution, then the cost of noise pollution is going down, and we need to add that to our sense of how we're doing as a society. Cost of climate change. Again, one that's probably not that surprising. Three social indicators. Value of housework. Yeah, so folks who promote the GPI feel like housework. And this is an example of what I pointed out as one of the criticisms of GDP. The social good that is not monetized, right? It's not part of a market transaction, so it doesn't show up in the GDP. But these folks feel like, well, it is a valuable thing. It's a good thing in society, and we should incorporate it in. Value of volunteer work. Again, another ostensibly good thing in society, and if we really want to have a good measure of how the society is doing, we should be able to incorporate that as well. Cost of commuting, from their standpoint, a bad thing in society. Commuting, some people might not agree, but their position is commuting is a negative. The more time people spend commuting, the less that detracts from the overall prosperity and progress. So we can find those. So those are some examples of the kinds of things that the GPI folks work on the GPI try to make visible and try to incorporate into our sense of how we're doing as a society. Now, I thought it might be useful to give you those examples because the examples, I think, lend themselves to, or hearing the examples makes it easier to understand what some of the criticisms of the GPI are. And they're really two basic criticisms. One is that it's too subjective. And that it's subjective in two ways. First, that the decision about what counts as a social good or a social bad is just a subjective decision. Some people might like to commute and might feel like commuting isn't a social bad, it's a social good. The opportunity to spend time with myself in my car, listening to NPR, I like it. I don't take it away. So the idea that there is a way to be able to identify all the things that we ought to be paying attention to, and that you can do that in some kind of objective way, is one of the criticisms. The second part of that criticism, even if people agree that if we could get unanimity on what the list of social goods are, we couldn't necessarily get unanimity on how to assess their value, right? Particularly how to measure their value. And so this criticism of the GPI is that it's too subjective with respect to what it counts, and it's too subjective with respect to how it counts. The second criticism, which I think is in some ways a more interesting criticism, is that the GPI really just does the same thing that the GDP does. It just does it in a slightly more complicated way, which is to say that it tries to get the one number that will rule us all, right? Because what it does with these 26 things is it turns them all into dollars, and then it adds them all up and gives you a dollar figure. So whereas the GDP looks at all the economic activity to come up with a dollar figure, the GPI looks at a lot of other variables, but it still tries to turn them all into a dollar value, add that dollar value up, net out the costs, add in the value, and then give you that number. And so so what it winds up doing is it gives you a more accurate, it may give you a more accurate sense of the cost of things that are perceived as progress. But in doing so, it just gives you a way to know how much you have to pay in order to do those things. So once you've aggregated, once you've established a kind of common metric of dollars, and then you netted it all out, it doesn't tell you anything about whether you could get the same number in a variety of different ways. So you could have a lot more pollution so long as you found a way to get a lot less commuting time at the same time. You could figure out what the cost is, what you need to pay in order to be able to move more, essentially. And you just do more of that other thing. And as far as the GPI thing is concerned, it's fine. You don't have any. It's the same as if you just do the good thing. So we have for the past few years, as Tom mentioned, Maryland is one of a small handful of states that have invested in a GPI. The state of Maryland has a GPI, as an official genuine progress indicator. You can go on the website, the state's website, and the Department of Natural Resources, and you can see this thing. And the state, for the past 5 years, has annually calculated the GPI and announced what the GPI number is. Most people in the state have no idea that this is the case. And this is despite the fact that in every state of the state address that the governor has given since the GPI was established, he has mentioned the GPI. But nobody knows that the state has done it, because the state doesn't do anything with it. The state calculates it and announces the number, and then And so, so there have been people who have been interested in trying to see the state do more with the GPI. They're trying to figure out, well, how do you apply it? How do you implement it? How do you actually incorporate it into decision making? And we have been supporting some of the folks that are trying to do that work. And that has included trying to apply the GPI to legislation. So in the 2014 legislative session, they did an analysis of a number of pieces of legislation with respect to how much value, how much they added to or detracted from the state's GPI. There's also been efforts to develop the GPI at sub-state level. So there's a Baltimore City GPI, that was a step that was developed, and that was used to assess the city of Baltimore's climate action plan. There's efforts to, or conversations about doing the same thing with other municipalities in the state as well. It's not at all clear, we have, as you know, or as you Marylanders know, we have a new governor. It's not at all clear that in the new administration, the state will continue to track the GPI and continue to support it. So that's what the GPI is. That's what's happened with the GPI. I have talked longer than I intended to talk, and so I'm going to stop. And see if I can get you to talk.
Then,
My friend keeps saying,
Stuart, is the Town Creek Foundation then funding some effort to ensure that the state does maintain that GPI? I mean, is that an initiative of the foundation in any way?
some of the people that we support are interested in that and interested in trying to get the state to continue to track the GPI. So some of our funds are being used for that purpose. You know, whether or not it's not entirely clear to us that that's the best strategy. It's not that institutionalizing the GPI within the state bureaucracy has advantages and disadvantages as well. We are probably about to see one of the disadvantages now, which is that it's subject to political changes and political developments. So one strategy is to try to get the state to say, okay, we're really going to wrap our arms around this thing. We're going to try to figure out how we can use it as a decision-making tool. We're going to make it part of what we do. Another strategy is to not try to have it institutionalized within the state, but instead to use it as an organizing platform for people who think that there needs to be better and different ways to make public decisions. And the GPI tells that story reasonably well. Whether it is the better way or not is less clear, but it can tell the story about how we need better tools and different tools. And so that could be a better strategy, not trying to get the state to keep doing it and to institutionalize it, but just use it to have conversations with people about, well, don't we need other ways of making decisions? And getting that conversation started. So it could be a bridge to something else rather than the goal itself. I feel badly because I feel like I've grudging you.
No, I'm great.
But you're like the martial arts guy, so.
Yes. Question about how you deal with qualitative and quantitative action. Taking these large numbers that are really only funding and pushing us to talk more about money and talk about. What is the opposite of deforestation? Is that reforestation? Talking about reforestation and afforestation. How do you typically address that? I'm talking about it's difficult to take these numbers in a financially motivated world and change these measurements of finance and then bring them back around to make sustainable ecological change. What are some of the avenues that you go to besides, what are some of the avenues you use to try and address that? And if so, is there enough concern about that is a necessary angle? Because sustainable environmentalism, so yes, but where are some of those outlets? How do you
Well,
reframe that?
the principal, the principal outlet actually is to make markets. So, the thing that we see more of than anything else right now are people beginning to develop the market infrastructures for transacting ownership of ecosystem services. So there's a significant part of the global climate negotiations that involve how to establish protocols that will allow people to pay farmers and others, landowners, to plant more trees. And because of the carbon sequestration service that those trees provide. And sort of creating a market whereby people who need to demonstrate that they have reached some measure of greenhouse gas emission reduction can do so by purchasing credits that were generated by people other places planting trees. So that's the most direct way is to make markets and monetize those services. And that's what we see a lot of that. We're beginning to see that in the state of Maryland around bay pollution at the Chesapeake Bay, and developing markets for trading. Significant component of pollution at the Chesapeake Bay is nutrients running off of farmland. Another significant component is all sorts of stuff running off paved property, stormwater. It's much more expensive to reduce pollution running off of paved impervious surfaces than it is to reduce pollution running off of farmland. So what the state has been in the process of trying to do is to develop the infrastructure for the market. And people who need to reduce a certain amount of pollution from running off of their pavement can meet that requirement by paying farmers to reduce pollution running off of their farmland. And don't have to do that directly. You don't have to go out and find the farmer to do that. But there's actually a market where the farmer will put their credits on the market, and the person who needs reductions will just buy those credits. So that's the way that's happening.
So you shared some of the indicators with us, but are they all in monetary terms?
They are all monetized in order to be
Measurable.
that. And that's the criticism that it's all subjective, what you count and how you count it. The response to that is, well, we're not on the part of the people that develop the GPI is that we are not saying that this is the entire set of social goods.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying this is the set that we can monetize.
Mm-hmm.
This is the set that we can count. And so, there is still disagreement about whether they're counting those things properly.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different question, and you can actually establish kind of parameters within which you could get agreement on. Okay, we will count this in this way. I mean, volunteer work. There are standard ways of measuring the dollar value of volunteer work.
Mm-hmm.
And noise pollution, I think, is a little more complicated, but certainly water pollution is not.
The GPI is a good fit. Just some of the issues we're discussing in Tom and Michael's environmental class in terms of how how do you put a value on the intrinsic good of nature and the ecosystem? You know, at least to come up with perhaps just an argument to maybe counteract, the proponents that will use the market value of building industry or putting a development on the Eastern Shore, for instance. How do you counteract that with another dollar figure that says, well, but you're removing all this intrinsic value that nature provides, So I mean, it sounds like that's at least kind of a start in terms of the GPI.
Are there people in that conversation in the class who resist the idea of doing that? Who feel
Oh, we got rid of them.
But are there people here who resist the idea of doing that? Who feel like, no, the whole point is not to try to figure out what the dollar value of fresh air is, or the dollar value of clean water is, that cheapens it, that diminishes it. Is that?
Well, it reinforces the fact that we're a community that defines itself by monetarily, by a dollar value, and as opposed to trying to think of it in some different way. I don't know what it would be.
I second that. I mean, the idea of utilitarian value, the benefit to people, the usefulness, kind of rubs up against intrinsic values.
Who said there's definite value to actually making that number, but we never want to ever get to that number. So by making that number even easily fathomable, people might give a push in the right direction. When I'm a comic book guy, I was just comic book tank girl, you have to buy water and air, not really important and gentle. But when low-income families can no longer afford to breathe, that will become much more of an issue. And that, there's a lot of value in that, is there not? So, as much as I'd like to say that we can all have, the list of human rights or the list of life necessities that we all have, that we shouldn't have to put a value on that. But we live in a society where human lives mean close to nothing to the dollar. So I think that creating that is a great value. As dark as it sounds, and as much as I wish we didn't have to think about it, there are already numbers and of course about how much a tree is worth in the city. And like when they moved the Baltimore stadium, and that they had to replace those trees because of all the pollution, that those trees are already helping you out with that, you double the contaminants. I mean, the fact that we should never have to go red to get better, but if you can give those numbers beforehand, if people know that the stock market is going to crash, they want to do something about it. People really know that, okay, even as an American citizen and follow our great grand privileges, the thing that you kind of came into this world taking super for granted is going to be gone, and you're not going to be able to afford to breathe. I think that's a good, switch to behind before you get in real trouble with blowing it.
Well, what some people get concerned about is that if you can come up with a precise kind of dollar value for the cost of pollution, then you're just telling polluters how much they have to pay in order to keep polluting. So this is the social value of this, or the social detriment of this, and I'm going to keep doing it. And now I know what I need to provide society in order to compensate for. So that's the concern that some people have.
Yes, but there are certainly those people that will pay.
Right.
And I've seen that in development projects, around St. Michael's, where you try to fight the development, and they'll just pay whatever they have to pay to get it through.
Right, so there's there's still a lack of consciousness about it and a sense of accountability, I think, that seems to be missing. Or even a way to make people accountable. I mean, other than just paying it monetarily. which doesn't really change the mindset.
I think for me, part of the problem is that that dollars sort of measure a transaction at a given point in time, rather than measuring a long-term issue. And so dollars are really, really good at measuring the value of one good or service for another, as long as it's just right now, and not taking into consideration any long-term effects. But they don't measure the investment potential, essentially, of, say, planting a whole bunch of trees that might provide better air for an area, or especially things that expand beyond the lifespan of the human individual. It's very hard to get people to see the investment value of that, and I think that's essentially where the trouble is with making that doing that dollar to investment conversion. That's where it is for me anyway.
Although I would have to say that there certainly are economists who think that they can capture the kinds of things that you're referencing. I think that they can. We think they're smart enough to be able to figure out, so how do we include in the price these, not just the sort of current market price, but avoided costs, avoided opportunities, and
Right.
pack all that in.
Yeah, but I mean, there are also economists who think that they can guess how much gold is going to cost in a year, and then make choices based on that. And there are ways that we can estimate and make our best guess about some of those things. But part of the reason that there is even a market for gold, and that people do speculative trade, is because there is some uncertainty about what it's really worth. So I think that's one of the difficulties, right? Is that there is this sort of inherent uncertainty about, well, we don't actually know what the future is going to be, and so it's hard to say. It is inherently difficult to say how valuable something is going to be in 10 years' time, especially 100 years' time.
And there are also a lot of people who are just, who coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, so we want to put these issues in the care of people who make markets. People who just feel like this, we just have, I think, a legitimate and understandable skepticism about the integrity of those processes.
What does it look like when they're talking about the relationship of human health in terms to the environment, and talking about the kind of cost that it's going to cost us to support ourselves if the environment continues to go the way it's going? How much of an incentive does that do for public health care? Or for some people, I imagine, yes, that's great. Like, we're going to make scrubbers or whatever, and we're working on technology to help fill the need in that space. But what does that put a good, thorn in someone's side when it's going to cost you more as a state to support your people and growing population because of your environment? Is that a major incentive? Does that push a lot of things, or is it kind of a constant topic in the game?
That's most typically seen in terms of the health impacts of air pollution, and that's most often quantified in terms of emergency room visits, asthma, deaths from asthma, these kinds of things. And there certainly are people who feel as if talking about the health impacts of pollution, and doing so in as quantifiable ways as possible, is an effective way to mobilize support for pollution reduction policies. And I think it has some impact. I'm not sure it's as effective as some people think it is. it gets really effective when there's some dramatic incident or dramatic set of incidents of pollution-related health impacts. So there was, several years ago, there was an outbreak of hysteria in the Chesapeake Bay that was a dramatic example of, or led to some dramatic examples of the potential consequences of pollution of the bay. And that actually had the visibility of that issue played a significant role in generating some policy change. But a lot of the health impacts are more chronic and sort of ongoing, and not sort of huge spikes in deaths or spikes in hospital visits, and so they don't often have that same kind of impact as others. Sort of something that's dramatic that you see on the news, that you're reading and hearing about everywhere, that this terrible thing is happening to people as a result of pollution. Well, you have been really kind to sit there and have me yak at you for this amount of time, and I thank you for that. I thank you also for your participation in both the cultural sustainability and the environmental studies programs. I think the cultural sustainability program is it's a tremendous idea and a wonderful thing to have, and I think you all should really think of yourself as pioneers, because I understand it's the only program in the country. So congratulations for your pioneering spirit. And I hope that there may be ways that we can use our relationships in the state to engage folks in the environmental studies program with environmental work in the state and environmental workers in the state. It's a really interesting state in which to be studying this stuff and thinking about this stuff. So maybe that we can help with that.
I would like to see more of that. We in fact have some students who are interested in working on issues, environmental justice issues in the city of Baltimore. Of course, in the Eastern Shore, the impacts of the Chesapeake Bay. So I want to thank you for coming tonight, Stuart. Hope you'll come back and see us again.
I love it.
Before you go to your questions,
Yeah.